And we are live. It is 5 o'clock on Saturday night. Gonna do a little bit of Kilchoman tonight, but before we do, let's kick it off with a little bit of rock and roll. So usually I do a review of a whiskey, provide the history in this current series for that particular distillery, and then the following Saturday during a live stream, do another whiskey perhaps from the distillery, and we have a little quiz and all that. But I've already reviewed all the whiskeys that I have from Kilchoman, so I decided, you know what, I'll just do a core range live stream and give sort of an off-the-cuff review of the whiskeys as we go through them. But, oops, I need to ching. All right. So we're going to kick it off with the Machir Bay. I was drinking this earlier this week. It's bought at 46% ABV. We'll go over the notes in just a little bit. This is not my favorite, but so even though I'm sort of acting like a representative of the distiller, because that's what reps do. Reps, they'll cover the entire core range, maybe some special bottles. They'll tell you the history or whatever about the distillery. I'm free to say whatever the heck it is I want. If you notice, if you've been following my channel for a while, I don't have reps on my channel. I've only had one person who was sort of a rep manager, and that was for Teeling. I've had master distillers on and stillhouse managers on and stuff like that, but I haven't had any, your typical reps who come on and basically do an infomercial in your live stream, because they're there to do a job, which is to sell the whiskey, and they tend to be somewhat confined to what they can and cannot say about a distillery and a whiskey. If you ask them a question, hey, when you're not drinking whatever the brand is, they tend to say, oh, when I'm not drinking our brand, I'm usually drinking a beer or wine, or I don't drink any alcohol. And when they say that, then they have a script that they have to follow, and they're not allowed to venture off that script. David Belcher, thanks for tuning in. So generally, I don't want to bring on reps. Nothing against reps, but it's really my job not only to educate in terms of sharing my study of whiskey, but to give you a straightforward perspective on the whiskey. Are there other people who don't give you 100% straightforward perspective on the whiskey? Well, there are some whiskey tubers, and they can do whatever they want on their channel, who will only review whiskeys they like. And if they don't like their whiskey because they don't want to say anything negative, and I understand, then they're not going to review the whiskey, even if it's given them for free. They're just not going to do the video. I will do a video on a whiskey, whether I like it or not. All right, so I just poured myself a little bit of the Kilchoman Machir Bay. This one is from, I'm trying to think what year this was, because they can change in terms of how much age on them. This one is, the print is too damn small. Hold on. Damn. 2018. The date on it is, looks like, man, I can only read like 2018. So this is, I've had this one for a few years. Hey, for Fernando, thanks for tuning in. So let's get into the history of the distillery. Now, it's until Ardnahoe came along on Islay. It was the youngest distillery, newest distillery, but now Ardnahoe is the newest distillery. So the history is rather recent. And here we go. Kilchoman Distillery is located on a rockside farm in Bruichladdich, Islay, Scotland. Kilchoman is the westernmost distillery in Islay and the only distillery on Islay that is not directly on the sea. Its name comes from an old church whose ruins lie on the picturesque Machir Bay. The distillery uses barley grown on site at a rockside farm and malted at the distillery, as well as malt from Port Ellen maltings, and releases separate bottlings depending on the source of the grain. Kilchoman is one of 6 Scottish distilleries still working with traditional floor maltings and is unique in completing all parts of the whiskey making process: growing barley, malting, distilling, maturing, and bottling on Islay. The whiskey produced at Port Ellen maltings are peated at 50 ppm, while the malt peated on their own floor maltings is peated to around 20 ppm. The history of Kilchoman Distillery. In 2002, plans for Kilchoman Distillery on Rockside Farm on Western Islay were made. In 2005, Kilchoman was the first new distillery to be established on Islay since 1908. Production started in December 2005. In 2006, a fire broke out in the kiln, ceasing production for a few weeks, and malting ceased for the rest of the year. In 2007, the distillery was expanded with 2 new washbacks. In 2009, the first release of a single malt, a 3-year-old, was released on September 9th, followed by a second release. In 2010, there were 3 new releases and an introduction to the U.S. market. John McClellan from Bunnahabhain Distillery joined the team as general manager. In 2011, Kilchoman 100% Islay was released, as well as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. In 2012, Machir Bay, the first core expression, was released together with Kilchoman Sherry Cask and the second edition of the 100% Islay. In 2013, the Loch Gorm and Vintage 2007 were released. In 2014, a 3-year-old Port Cask Matured was released, and Cool Point was released in duty free. In 2015, a Madeira Cask Maturation was released, and the distillery celebrated its 10th anniversary. In 2016, the Sanaig and a Sauternes Cask Maturation were released. In 2017, a Portuguese red wine maturation was released, and a Vintage 2009 was released. In 2018, the original cask strength was released. In 2019, the distillery capacity was doubled with 2 new stills added, and a limited STR cask matured was released. Alrighty, so that Cool Point, that duty-free bottling, the Whiskey Crusaders, Matt and Will over at the Whiskey Crusaders just reviewed that, I would say within the last week. So if you're interested in checking out a review on that, check out the channel, because I've never seen anybody else review that whiskey. Really, really challenging to get. So before I get into the Machir Bay, let me give you a short little video on my notes on that one. The Kilchoman Machir Bay Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, peated at 50 ppm, Asian ex-bourbon cask 90%, ex-Oloroso Sherry cask 10%. It's a non-age statement. It's non-chill filtered, and has natural color. It's bottled at 46% alcohol by volume and sells for about $49. Alrighty. So right off the bat, I mean, the smoke and the peat hit you straight up. There's a little bit of a mint character there, which is kind of typical, I would say, of younger peated whiskeys. It has a little bit of that sort of a saccharine powdered sugar note, a little bit of vanilla. There's some green notes there. Let me say hi to everybody's in the room. David Bilter drinking Kilchoman Sanaig. Fernando, hello, good evening, Eric. Just poured Anika from the barrel. Sadly, I don't have a Kilchoman available. All right. I'm pouring some Compass Box blend now. Slangiava, Eric, and everyone. By the way, got a little bit of news, which you may have already heard. It's a little bit ashy. The smoky character is a little ashy. So you've been hearing me, you've been following me for a while, been talking about during live streams how I've been wanting to return to Scotland for my 3rd trip. You've also heard studying for the Council of Whiskey Masters. In fact, that's what this whole series is about. In fact, I think, hold on. There we go. This is Whiskey Producer Profile number 20 in the series. So last weekend, I thought, you know what? I'm going back to Scotland next summer. It seemed a little early to be making plans, to go back to Scotland this early. But I tend to plan my last two trips. I planned about 6 months out. Get cheaper flights, and there's a lot of work that goes in when you're hitting a lot of distilleries. You have to calculate how long does it get from this distillery to this distillery. What distilleries are open to the public is another issue. If you're a member of my Facebook group, I recently reposted a map. I took the Scotch Whisky Association map, and I annotated it as to which distilleries offer tours. So if you're going to make a trip to Scotland and how much time you're going to spend looking at distilleries, if you can download it. There's a file section in the Facebook group. You can download that and it'll indicate. I did one of these maps back in 2019. And when I was doing research for this upcoming trip, I realized some distilleries that weren't open didn't have tours. Now some of them do. Also, some of them they're undergoing renovations. I know Diageo has been renovating some of their distilleries, and some of them, if you're going to plan a trip for next year, check out the website. They're open to the public. However, they still have on their website an indication that they're currently not offering tours because of the COVID and pandemic. So that will probably be changing going into next year. So I uploaded that map, and basically it'll give you a listing of all the distilleries that are currently open to the public. Of course, you can only go so far in making your plans right now. The websites tend to change with the seasons. So obviously, in the middle of winter, everything's buried in snow, or a lot of snow. The tourism there's not as much traffic coming in. So some of them may have limited hours during the colder months of the year. Springtime, going in the summer, things ramp up. You get more tourism going on. Consequently, their hours change if they're open, whether or not they're open during the week, and stuff like that. So I was making tentative plans as to what distilleries I want to go to, how long it's going to take to get from one spot to another, and then you have to calculate, what tours do they have in the day? Do they have like a 10, 11 o'clock, and a 1 o'clock? Do they have a 10, a 12, and a 3 o'clock? So, and how long is the tour? Is it an hour? Is it an hour and a half? Is it 2 hours? So you have to do your calculations so that you have enough time to finish a tour, have enough time to get from that tour to the next one, and so on and so forth. So you put a lot of work into it. So all last weekend, I was working on the plans, and then something happened on Monday. And I actually posted, my original plan was to go from Glasgow up to the northwestern Highlands and visit the islands, Talisker, Isle of Raasay, Harris, and so forth. Ben Nevis, Torveig, anyway, all the rest of the distilleries out there. The peat character is a little ashy, and then there's a little mint character there. I mentioned in a previous a review of another whiskey. I haven't had one in a long time. It kind of reminds me a little bit of menthol cigarettes, but there's also a character that reminds me a little bit of a York's peppermint patty. Maybe a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of mint going on there. On the palate, so there's a bunch of things that I appreciate about Kilchoman. They're all non-chill filtered, natural color. The fact that they do at least part of their own malting. They don't do enough malting to provide all their needs, but at least they're doing some of it. So as you saw in the video there, their own maltings are peated at 20 ppm. Those that they get from Port Ellen are 50 ppm. So obviously, since this is at 50 ppm, this is a Port Ellen malting. So as I was making the plans, everything was basically there in terms of what I planned and what I want to do next summer. Basically, I'm going from the beginning of July to the 15th of July. So I'll leave here on June 30th, arrive on the 1st of July, and go from there. Bought my plane tickets. So I'm already, I'm planning my trip to Scotland. On Monday, I got an email from Springbank Distillery informing me that there is an opening for the Springbank Whiskey School, and I had 2 days to register. Now, this is something that has been on my radar for a real long time. There's book knowledge, which is what you're getting in my videos and what I'm doing on my free time, and videos and audio and podcasts. You can get all that information from there. And then there's experiential knowledge. It's one thing I like watching these TV shows where they do remakes of automobiles. They take some sort of it's sort of a classic automobile, but it's really run down. Maybe it's got some rust. It doesn't run, and so on and so forth. And then they go through. They show you within half an hour, whatever how long the episode is, a total makeover of an automobile. Or there's also ones that do the motorcycles. I like watching those. I like seeing the end product. I'm particularly interested in cars from the 1960s. Now, I took auto shop in high school for several years. I had a 67 GTO. So in my high school years, I spent some time under the hood. I don't want to work on automobiles now. We're working on the cars from the 1960s, which they didn't have all the computers and all the technical stuff. So I went to high school in early 1980s, and working on cars from the 1960s. But when I watch a show where they're doing makeovers of automobiles and they get under the hood, I can have a sense of appreciation for what it takes to completely renovate an automobile. I at least have a little bit of an experience of working on automobiles, that I have an appreciation for what they're doing. And to work in a distillery or in a winery gives you that same sort of appreciation for what it takes to make a wine or to make a whiskey. Also gives you a sense of, I understand what it takes to get from grapes to wine, or from grain, from barley to whiskey, because I've had hands-on experience with it. And so it's a different level of knowledge. It's a different understanding and a greater appreciation. So when I went back to college and studied enology, winemaking, I had to intern with 3 different wineries. But before that, I had volunteered to work at a winery called Shadow Mountain Vineyards up in the hill country of Temecula, because I knew I wanted to understand and learn about wine. And the best way to do that is to work in a winery. So I helped out with a harvest. We spent a day harvesting grapes. We did the press, or they call it a crush, and so on and so forth. So very, very early in my study of wine, I got a hands-on appreciation and understanding of what it takes to make wine. I'm taking a sip. Go, go, go. So I did not hesitate. I had 2 days to register. So even though this is super early, I had to register by November 17th. I immediately got on and registered. They only have 6 people per class. This is going to go from July 3rd to July 7th. So Monday through Friday. And then at the end, you take a test. And if you pass the test, you get the diploma. I am so unbelievably excited. I'm not kidding. I have been having difficulty sleeping this week because I'm so freaking excited. It's like a kid before Christmas. When I was a kid, probably starting in October, I would start ramping up in my excitement for Christmas Day. And by the time Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, I was so excited. Christmas Eve going into Christmas Day, I just really couldn't sleep because I was so excited about it. It would drive my brothers crazy, probably drove my parents crazy. And I'm sort of in that same way about this opportunity. Yes, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Yes, it's, I'm obviously Springbank has become now such an iconic distillery. It's such a one of a kind, very old school. No, the only computers they have is um, uh, like the cash register, that kind of thing. Everything is done by hand. I've toured Springbank Distillery before. I was at Springbank in 2019. I had visited Springbank in Campbellton, Glen Scotia, Glengyle. So I've already toured the distillery. I know what the atmosphere is like, and they mark things on chalkboards and stuff like that. So I know it's very, very, very old school. Old school. And I know a lot of whiskey tubers have become quite the fan of Springbank. And now, because there's been such a rave about it, and because they don't really have the ability to expand, produce more, consequently, bottles of disappearing. They used to be very easy to get here in California. Now they've become much more challenging. And you know it is. But even if it wasn't Springbank, even if it was, say, I don't know, Ben Romick, which is also a very old school distillery in the way they do things, even if some other distillery, Glen Scotia, whatever, I would be really, really excited because this is such a unique experience. It's a unique opportunity. And because I'm studying for exam that I'll take in 2024, what I'm expecting and really hoping for is that this experience will really ingrain into my brain a better understanding of the whiskey making process and a personal connection with it and my appreciation for what they do at Springbank and other distilleries. I mean, I would also like to visit other distilleries that are even more mechanized. I don't want to touch their computers or whatever. But I've toured. I've toured 40 distilleries in Scotland. But it's kind of like you kind of get walked through in an hour. I would like to spend an entire day hanging out in a distillery and shadowing the people who work in the distillery. All right, I'm going to talk about this whiskey. So it has that kind of saccharine powdered sugar character to it that is very common. It still is reflecting the new make. In terms of flavors, in terms of fruit, I'd say it's kind of tropical. It's like a smoky pineapple. There's a little bit of vanilla there. And it's overall sort of ashy in character in terms of the smoke. And then a mint. There's a lingering ashy mint character on the back end. So super, super excited to spend a week there. Now, originally, as I said, I was going to be going up to the Northwestern Highlands and visit the islands up there. That was part of my original plan. But I am not traveling on this trip alone. A couple of weeks ago, I had a guest on, Taylor. We were talking about the second level of the Council Whiskey Masters exam. I brought him on, and we talked about his strengths, his weaknesses, the overall experience of it. Well, he's going along with me since we're both studying for the level 3. And this is just a rare opportunity. I extended him an invitation. Hey, I have a spot open for 2, and do you want to come along? Anyway, long story short, so we're still working in the early part of the plans, but Taylor and I are going to be heading over to Scotland. Now, I've already been to Islay. I've been to Campbelltown. I haven't been to Jura. Ardenhoe wasn't open when I was in Islay, and I didn't actually go and tour Bowmore. I just walked around and took pictures. So I thought, you know what? Since we're already on the southern part of Scotland and we are somewhat in the neighborhood, rather than driving all from Campbelltown all the way up north up there, and those distilleries that I was planning on visiting up there aren't on the list of distilleries that you might get blinded on, because a lot of those distilleries, you can't even get them internationally, a lot of those whiskeys. I thought, you know what? Let's stay down south and let's go. Let's go back to Islay. I've been wanting to go back to Islay anyway. So we'll go to Campbelltown, spend a week there, obviously working and studying at Springbank. We'll visit the other 2 distilleries there. Then from there, we can take a ferry over to Islay and take a lot more relaxed, chill tour of the distilleries. I was there basically 3 days. We had eight distilleries. Well, actually, out of the 8 distilleries that were open, we hit 7 of them because we didn't tour Bowmore. So we had toured Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Kilchoman, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Lefroy, Bruichladdich, Kilchoman, and Bunnahabhain. And we went to Kalila. We were on the pier and the decks. We went into the tasting room so you could sample stuff there, but we didn't do a tour of Kalila. So on this trip, because I've been wanting to go back to, I fell in love with Islay. So this time I'll be able to spend a little bit more time there. I'll be able to tour Bowmore, which I didn't do before. We'll be able to tour Kalila, which I didn't do before. We just went to the tasting room. Ardenhoe, I think if it's not already, will probably be open to the public. We'll go to Ardenhoe, take another ferry over to Jura and visit Jura. So we'll be able to spend, say, July 8th through probably July. Again, I haven't worked this out in the details. Probably July 13th or something like that. 5 days on Islay and Jura. And then from there, still not sure where we're going to go from there. Might go back to the southern part of the Highlands. We'll be able to revisit Glengoyne. Maybe I'd like to go to Bladnoch, which is on the southern part. It's about an hour south of Glasgow, and go to Edinburgh and stuff like that. So we'll stay on the southern part of Scotland. But still working on all the details. Got plenty of time for that. But right now, that's the general big picture. I'm super excited about it. So let's talk about Kilchoman Machir Bay. Machir Bay is a beach, is a bay fairly close to the distillery. When I visited Kilchoman, we actually went to the bay. Now, if you were to look at a picture of Machir Bay in the summertime, you might think, oh, it's like, a beach in Florida or California. No, it's freezing ass cold, even in the middle of summertime. The weather was really nice when I was there in 2018. So me and I was with a tour group for that trip. I went to the Highlands on my own, but to Islay went with a group. Then we went down to the beach and people put their feet in the water, but it's cold. It's something to look at. You're not going to see people surfing or sunning themselves on the beach. It's just too damn cold. Too damn cold for that. All right. Just reading out the comments here real quick. All right. Whoa, that was close. So this is not my preferences for whiskey. Sometimes you hear me refer to young whiskeys that are peated, in which they're kind of trying to use the peat to mask the youth of it. And this is the whiskey I usually have in my mind. I don't like the powdered sugar saccharine character to it. I can still taste it now. The smoke helps. The peat helps. I think it would be better in a sherry cask. That would help. So it's not bad, but this is not my type of whiskey. There are some people, Bart over at Scotch Test Dummies, who loves young peated whiskey with, very peat and smoke forward profile to it. And for me, that's not it. I don't like this needs to go back in a cask. It needs to spend some more time in a cask. All righty. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And the next one is going to be the 100% Islay. So let me give you my notes on that one. All right. The Kilchoman 100% Islay single malt Scotch whiskey. 100% of the barley comes from Islay. It's aged in ex-bourbon cask. It's a non-aged statement. It's non-chill filtered, has natural color. It's bottled at 50% alcohol by volume and sells for about $110. Alrighty. Now the bottle looks very similar to the Machir Bay. It's the same colors. They just flipped them a little bit. So whereas this is gold blue trim, the Machir Bay is blue with gold trim. So they just swapped the colors on it. Back to the chat. Now this one I really like. Not in terms of the character of the whiskey, but what it is they're trying to do. This whiskey, philosophically, is sort of like Bruichladdich, which we covered last time. With the influence of Mark Rainier, Bruichladdich sort of takes a French wine terroir perspective and an approach to producing whiskey. And I had mentioned last week that even though Bruichladdich is a very old distillery, going all the way back to 1881, if I recall correctly, with the influence of Mark Rainier, it sort of became a new distillery because the character and the way in which they do things. Now, Mark Rainier has left. He's now doing Waterford they sold the distillery over in Ireland, and I've already reviewed Waterford. And if you know the story of Waterford, they are taking what he started at Bruichladdich in terms of the concept and just going all in on it. So this is a blend of barleys from different fields on Islay to give you a more authentic representation of Islay itself. This one was bottled in 2016. So distilled in 2010, bottled in 2016. So it's 6 years old. So one of the things about this one versus the Machir Bay is it doesn't have the powdered sugar saccharine character to it. But one of the things that I was thinking about this earlier this week, does your knowledge of what they're trying to do, the geekiness of it, influence your perception of the whiskey? This is the value of blind tasting, because there's you might have a prejudice for the whiskey when not blind tasting to it, because you appreciate what they're trying to do. They're trying to make something really authentic. They're geeking out. They're producing something unique that other places aren't doing, using local peat, local barley, non-chill filtered, natural color. They're checking the boxes. This is at, hold on, I just read it, 50% ABV. So it's not that 40% or 43 or not even 46. It's at 50 ABV. So it's a very respectable ABV. So knowing this about a whiskey and coming to it, do you take those values that you hold and then sort of impart them into the whiskey, and so that you like it more than if you were doing it blind tasting? I watched a video. Actually, it's one of the Somm films. There's currently three Somm films about sommeliers, wine sommeliers. There's a fourth one coming out. The second one focused on wines. The first one focuses on these guys seeking to become master sommeliers. Great movies, by the way. Very inspirational, motivational, particularly the first one if you're studying for exams. And there's one master sommelier where they talk about wines and how sommeliers geek out about wines. And he goes on just sort of nerding out about a Beaujolais that's made from Gamay, south of Côte de Beaune in Burgundy. And he's just going on and on and on and on about the sort of old school, rustic ways in which this wine producer is making this wine. And he's getting really hyped up about it. A wine sommelier or wine enthusiast, wine geek cares about things that the average consumer does not. What they want to drink and what we want to have on a wine list at a restaurant may not be to what the average person wants to want to drink. And it's probably true for whiskeys. I mean, if 90% of Scotch whiskey is blended, that 10% is a non-single malt, and that 10% is single malts. If you prefer the single malts, you're already, just from that one factor, a little bit more geeky than the person who's buying whiskeys to, for the most part, probably make cocktails. But if you're watching whiskey tubers going on and on about whiskeys, that sets you apart again from a whole another part of the consumer, because now there's some people that like beer, they like wine, or they whatever. And yeah, they have it with dinner, or they drink with it, but they're not going to sit down and read books. They're not going to watch videos. They're not going to listen to podcasts. They're not going to join, whiskey communities on Facebook. It's just, for them, it's just a beverage that they really like, but they're not going to go all in on it. So we all are a unique whiskey lover, because we get nerdy and particularly if you're watching mine, where I like to get a little bit more in depth. Then you're the creme de creme, the 2% of the whiskey consumer. We don't really reflect the typical whiskey consumer. And so because we can kind of get excited and geek out about a whiskey, that when we know all this went into this whiskey, the lengths to which they went into to produce it, we already have an appreciation for it before we've even smelled it. And so you can kind of be prejudiced in favor to it before you've even tasted it. I mean, Waterford, there was a little sort of a debate among the whiskey tubers, the whiskey community, about Waterford, because people are like, hey, it's too dang young, yeah, that's potential, yada yada yada. And then there was another part that was like, no, this is awesome, this is fantastic, this guy's cutting new ground. It's really on the cutting edge of producing whiskey, yada yada. And then people say, oh, it's overpriced, overhyped. We've had these debates in the whiskey tuber and the whiskey community. The average person buying a bottle of whiskey is not having these conversations. So what do I think? The smoke is, I would say, a little more integrated than the Machir Bay. It does have those tropical notes, but it's bringing up some stone fruit notes, some tree fruit, orchard fruit, apples and pears maybe. I'm not getting the mintiness. I'm not getting the powdered sugar. I'm not getting the saccharin. I'm getting a little more of an oomph of cask, of bourbon cask, slight caramel, maybe a little bit of butterscotch. Of course, I'm competing and working through the smoke to get to that because it is heavily peated. On the palate, it's fresh fruit up front. A little bit of the tropical, apple, pear, little vanilla, a little bit of the baking spices, and it's wrapped real well with smoke and peat. It's not ashy. That mint doesn't show up on the back end. And even the Machir Bay in this one, they have a mouthfeel, a viscosity, a fullness in the mouth, a roundness, creamy, not in terms of flavors of cream, but in terms of mouthfeel. It's a kind of a round, soft mouthfeel that has some weight in your mouth. That's not only because of the ABV, it's because of the non-chill filtering and the quality of the cask. You could tell they're using really high quality cask. But there's also something and it's hard to describe. There is a pristineness, a clarity of the spirit. It still shines through. You're still experiencing. It's not overwhelmed with the smoke and peat, so you don't, or even at the age of the cask, you're still getting a purity of spirit in this whiskey and a certain pristineness of the spirit. So you're still maintaining some of the primary characteristics of the barley. There is a little bit of a barley showing up on the back end, although it kind of gets hidden by the smoke. And there's a cleanness. There's the way it finishes as well. There's a sort of a wafting of the smoke character on the back end, but it finishes fresh. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. There's a freshness and cleanness to the spirit. It's good evolution, but it's still on the young side without being overly youthful. And this is a challenge. So you have your primary characteristics that come from the barley, the place where it's from. You have secondary characteristics, which comes from the production process of making the spirit. Your tertiary characteristics, which comes from aging in the casks. With wine, you have tertiary characteristics from aging in the bottle. The more emphasis you have from the casks, from the aging, you put more age on it, it'll start to diminish or reduce the influence and the character of the barley in terms of rawness, distinctiveness of the barley, and it'll emphasize more of the cask character. Take a heavy sherry bomb would be a classic example, to where it doesn't matter where you bottle it. It doesn't matter whether you use, well water or use, filtered water bottled from a bottling plant in the lowlands. Even though you made the whiskey up in the highlands, you send them cask strength down to the lowlands to get bottled at a bottling plant, and they use filtered water that they put into it. It doesn't really show the place of the highlands and bring it down from 63 down to maybe 46%, right? Now a large part of what's in that whiskey didn't come from the highlands, came from the lowlands when you brought it down to bottle strength. This whiskey, in its youthfulness, still maintains some more of the primary and secondary characteristics. And I have an appreciation for that. But that's going into it knowing what's in the bottle and how it was made and understanding how it was made. Tasted blind. If I wasn't told where it was from, if I wasn't, and knew how it was made and the distinctiveness of the barley and all that. Tasted blind, my perception and expectations and what I would desire from did I say wine? I meant whiskey. I do that a lot. I'll call a chateau a distillery, and I'll call a distillery a winery. Tasted blind, not knowing where it was from and how it was made, and the philosophy in making this whiskey, I would want something more. I would want more age. I would want, 10, 15 plus years old. I would be looking for something with more cask influence on it in terms of preferences. So there, in one of the Saw movies, I think it's the second Saw movie. They talk about blind tasting. What's the value of blind tasting? Carol Meredith is in the film. For those who don't know, Carol Meredith, she and her husband owned vineyards in the Napa Valley. she was a professor at UC Davis doing genetic research on grapes. She's the one who, along with some others, discovered that Zinfandel, California, is not only related to Primitivo from Apulia in Italy. It goes back to a grape in Croatia called Tribodrag. I know I'm going back into wine. I'm just telling you who the lady is. She's Dr. Carol Meredith. Okay. So this is her credentials. This is how smart this lady is. This is how she's a very important person, and she's got a great character, great sense of humor. She mentions in this movie, one, she says, blind tasting. Is there any other industry that has so much bullshit? Yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, it's a great, great movie. And she makes a comment about blind tasting. What's the value of blind tasting? Because some of the important things in understanding wine is understanding where it's from and how it was made, and have an appreciation of all that stuff that goes into making a wine. So because she's not a somm studying for exams, she expresses certain attitudes about the value of blind tasting. That because you're not going into it with an appreciation of the history and terroir and everything else on it, you're not fully appreciating the wine. And I think that same sort of principle can apply to this whiskey, that to truly appreciate it, you need to know how it was made. Now, if you could go volunteer to go spend some time working at Kilchoman Distillery, that would enhance that appreciation. Or if you could at least do a tour of Kilchoman, that would enhance it all the more, so that you're going to love Kilchoman even more, because you see how cool it is that they are sort of restoring it as a farm distillery. There's actually, when I was there, they were building like a little, I don't know if they call them stables for the animals, and then animals there, like a farm. And so it's those factors that give us a greater love and appreciation, that it's not a whiskey factory just popping out a product. And I think that's really what we're talking about, is the difference between a distillery producing a craft whiskey versus a factory producing a product. And it's common to say, people talk about the product, and I do it myself. I talk about wanting to understand the people, the place, the production, and the product, and the provenance of a whiskey or wine. So we call it a product. But there's sort of a difference between respecting a whiskey as a craft, called an art, work of art. Maybe that's going a little too far, getting overly romantic. And between that and a product that is just popped out like a machine, run through, even if it's automated, and is scientifically put together to always be the same. Not that there isn't a skill and so forth in making blended whiskeys, because there is, but it's a completely different mindset. All right. I had the notion to become a master of wine because of my sense in smell and taste. After 10 years of study, the journey was too much of a challenge. I'm now appreciating the whiskey journeys. It's funny. So most of you guys already know this. I got into whiskey studying for the WSET diploma because I wanted to become a master of wine. It's sort of an introduction, and it is one of the ways in which you can get accepted into the Master of Wine program. But I hear you totally. I've seen people studying for the Master of Wine exam after several years of not passing, give up on it, and they realize, it's just exhausting, and they need to get out their career and the family, and they find these other things that are important. But I think there is even a value that even if you don't ever pass, or maybe you just decide, you know what, this is a lot of work, I'm going to get back to my job and not burn myself out on this. There's still just a value in trying and going through all the books or whatever else. Even if you don't complete it, you get a greater appreciation for what it takes particularly for those who actually pass the exam. So I like this whiskey, but I find it difficult to give it a fair score knowing what I know about it. Philosophically, in terms of everything that they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish, I'll probably go a 92. In terms of if I was tasting it blind, I'm just trying to be as honest as possible. I would probably go, just look at the whiskey in and of itself, forget everything else about it, probably in the 87 to 88. And wow, that's a huge difference there. I know. That's the difference between blind tasting and tasting with inside knowledge about the whiskey. And I'm just being honest, that if I was blind tasting it, what would I want more out of it? I would want more depth and layers of flavor, which you're only going to get from age. You're only going to get from age. This is sort of like a senior in high school football player who's very, very, very good. They took the champions for the year, but it's not the NFL. Or if you want to talk about European soccer, it's not the World Cup. It's not the World Cup. But because of the effort put into it, I have that great appreciation for it. So in terms of recommending it, if you want to geek out on whiskey and understand whiskey, I would say this is a must buy. This is a must buy for nothing else than understanding and appreciating it for what it is and what they're trying to do. All righty. I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm not finishing all these drams tonight. I will finish them up after dinner later on. Let's go on to the next one, which is Kilchoman Sanaig. The Kilchoman Sanaig Islay single malt Scotch whiskey, aged in ex-Oloroso sherry cask for the majority and ex-bourbon cask for the minority. Has a non-age statement, it's non-chill filtered, has natural color, bottled at 46% alcohol by volume, and sells for anywhere between $60 and $80. Of course, the prices are always relative to where you live. There are some people who put the price of the whiskey into the configuration of how they score it. I don't think it makes any sense. Because, I've seen whiskeys, the highly sought after ones here in California vary as much as $500. I've seen whiskeys, I could pick it up for $200, $300, but I look around on the internet and there are places selling for $500 more. We've all heard and we're all familiar with, the secondary market, and then a lot of retailers are sort of trying to get in on the game. So your hyped whiskeys. So if there's a, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 difference in the price of a whiskey, how do you then configure the price of a whiskey into your score when that's how much you paid for it, not how much everybody else is necessarily going to pay for it? So while I will sort of go, hey, I could say this is a very good whiskey. I bought it for $80. It's selling for $200. I would not pay $200 for it. But that's not going to affect my score on the whiskey, what I think it is qualitatively. I think you should, and again, people do whatever the hell they want, and scores to some extent are, who in the hell cares? There is a subjective element to it, right? I do try to explain my scores in terms of layers of flavor, depth, and complexity. Not just purely subjective what I like it. I can see that a whiskey is well made, or wine is well made. It has a nice range of flavor. It has a depth of flavor. It has a lot of development from the front and middle to the finish, even if it isn't my particular favorite style of whiskey. That could be Canadian. It could be bourbons. I like bourbons, but I'm not a bourbon aficionado, like my fellow whiskey tubers who are focused on bourbons. I don't know bourbons the way they do. I like them, but I don't geek out on them the way they do. Anyway, enough of that. So prices always vary, and it's a little nutso. The prices I'm giving you are the prices that California more or less usually what I find locally. A lot of times I'm looking at the chain stores. I use a wine searcher. It's a search engine for wines, but you can search for whiskeys. I use wine searcher a lot, just Google, and I look at the large chain stores and see what they're selling them for. Basically, in terms of like core range whiskeys, not your rare, hard to find whiskeys. That's where I'm getting my prices from. So this is Sanaig. The next one is going to be Loch Gorm. Sanaig and Loch Gorm are kind of like brothers or sisters. They're siblings because both of them have a sherry cask. So the previous whiskeys are looking at a bourbon cask. Now we're heading over to sherry. It's more the difference between Sanaig and Kilchoman is the percentage of sherry versus bourbon cask. I think younger whiskeys benefit by not just sherry, but bourbon and sherry. It adds layers of flavor. Think of the Port Charlotte 10, for example. You know, I'm a big Ardbeg fan, but I did a blind tasting. Well, it wasn't blind. I did a comparative tasting between Port Charlotte 10 and Ardbeg 10, and I gave it to the Port Charlotte 10 because the Port Charlotte 10 has bourbon cask and sherry cask, and it shows in the more layers of flavor and complexity in the whiskey. There's just a little bit extra there in the development of that particular whiskey. Don't get me wrong. I've only had one bottle of Port Charlotte. I've gone through 6 bottles, or I'm now in my 6th bottle of Ardbeg 10. And yet, neck to neck, or bottle to bottle, head to head, I would give it to the Port Charlotte. All right. The nose on this one isn't huge. Of course, I've just had a couple of whiskeys. That makes it a little challenging, so drink some water. The nose isn't huge, but the smoke is definitely there. And I really like the way it interweaves with the sherry influence. It's sort of like a chocolate-covered raisin. So this one, in comparison to the previous two, has more of the chocolate character to it. There is the dried black fruit notes. Maybe a little bit more. I don't really get so much of the figs, but more of the raisins. Maybe even a little bit of blackberry or blueberry character to it. There's a hint of spice going on there. The Machir Bay and the 100% Islay had some baking spice character to it a little bit, although a lot of it gets sort of masked by the smoke and the peat. That's called an Ericism when you have sort of a Biden moment. But this is integrated really, really, really nice. On the palate, nice development. It doesn't come across, it doesn't seem like it doesn't come across as having a lot of age on it, but there's none of those off-putting. Pudding sounds like off-putting. Sounds like a pudding that went bad. There's no too young notes. So it doesn't have the saccharin. It doesn't have that powdered sugar character there, but it does show youthful and that there's a freshness to it. And it doesn't have the character of, say, like a Dunnage Warehouse or this. So it's kind of hard to articulate the signs of age. So one of the things I want to do over the next year and a half is focus on blind tasting. So I'll be going to 2023. I'll be doing live streams, bringing Taylor on I'm sending him some whiskeys. He'll send me some whiskeys, and we'll do some blind tasting because we need to practice for exams. So it's the freshness of the cask, the freshness of the whiskey that shows youthfulness, and yet not so youthful that it shows new making character, which puts me, in terms of you're trying to guess an age, it puts me in that 8 to 10 year range. So need to work on how do you determine the age of a whiskey, and you can have some 19, 20-year-old whiskeys that still seem youthful, and you can have some younger whiskeys that seem like they're older than they are because of the character of the cask that they're using. The cask, quality cask can make it seem older than it really is. But something I want to work on is more practice in not understanding the original ingredients, the grain, understand, be able to perceive and get very close on the ABV, but also to nail down the age. And I think I'm trying to determine the grain, whether it's a barley or a blend, whether it's a malt or a blend, the cask type, and the age. I think the ABV. I think out of all those, I would think the age is probably the most difficult. ABV, it's how much tingle, how much burn, how much weight, how much mouthfeel. Higher ABV can add its own distinctive type of sweetness to it as well. But working on age and understanding age, and so then you want to buy new make from a distillery, buy their new make, so that you can understand. Just like going from eating grapes off the vine to a wine that's been aged for 10 years, that full range. Same thing, going from tasting new make all the way up to a whiskey that's been aged 10, 15, 20 years, so that you understand the entire process and what happens over time as you age that spirit. So one of the things I want to do, returning to Scotland for the third trip, I already have a couple bottles from distilleries of new make, but I want to bring back more so you can sort of set your gauge of your brain, not that you're going to sit around and drink new make or make cocktails with or something silly, purely to understand the primary ingredients that goes into a whiskey. All right. The smoke and peat is it's a big peat if you're new to peat, but in comparison to Lefroy, it's more of a medium peat. It envelops the spirit really well. There's sort of a nice balance between the bourbon cask and the sherry cask. It's no way, a sherry bomb. You can tell the sherry notes are there. But because it's not a big smack of fig, dates, raisins, there's just sort of a little bit of a chocolate raisin there. You can tell there's some other cask going on there. If I was tasting this blind, the conclusion I would come to was either second, third use sherry casks, or it had a bourbon influence. So that sherry influence has been sort of reined back and dialed down. It's either because the cask, it doesn't have as much influence, it's in a second, third use, or because they've also used a bourbon cask. In this case, it's a bourbon cask. All righty. Score, high 80s. We're back in 88, something like that. Again, what I want, get it over 90, more depth, more layers of flavor, more richness, and all those things that we're looking for in whiskeys. But in terms of a youthful whiskey, it's really well crafted. Like the previous whiskey, there is a certain clarity and pristineness, and authenticity to the character of the spirit that still shines through in the whiskey. All right, hey, Richard Murray, how you doing, man? Richard says he's listening. I'm listening. How you doing, man? Sorry if I've been missing comments. Question: have you done a comparative tasting on E150A versus non-E150A from the same distillery? No, but that would be an awesome thing to do. Grumpy Old Fart, if you have any particular distilleries in mind that produce E150 and non-E150A, compare. It'd have to be comparable whiskeys, right? You can't a bourbon cask versus a sherry cask, or you know what I mean, peated versus non-peated. That's not going to help. You would want whiskeys that are similar, or it could even be two whiskeys from two different distilleries, but the casting is similar and the age is similar and the ABV is similar. So, if you have an idea in mind that would be a good idea, put it in the comment section, and I'll look around for it, because I mean that's a whole nother layer. That's a whole nother layer. Yes, the PC10 has bourbon and sherry cask in it. Did California price for Glenlivet is still the lowest in the land? I don't know. I tend to shop a lot in California. We tend to do better than a lot of states. Definitely do better than Canada does on prices. Ohio has fixed pricing, but then they also have lower availability. I apologize if I've been missing questions. The combination of sherry and bourbon cask was the reason I enjoyed the Glengoyne 15 so much. I don't think a sherry cask is a wine cask. Sherry cask is a wine cask. You know what? I could be wrong. Hey, you know what? I can always be wrong. I will double check on that, but I could have swore it had a sherry cask. Erik Wait studies. What is your opinion of unadded coloring, E150? It's unnecessary. It's an additional cost. It's more work. We don't need it. I mean, that's pretty much the same as everybody else. Don't need it. It's unnecessary. Does it affect the flavor and so forth? I'm more against using corks than I am E150, because I haven't found E150 affects the flavor. I went on a rant on this last week. Corks can only add trichloroanisole, TCA, cork taint to your whiskey. They can break and just become a pain in the ass, and they contribute nothing, zippo, nada, zilcho to a whiskey. They're absolutely unnecessary. All right, I went over that last week. I'm not doing it again this week. All right. All right, we're going to do the Loch Gorm. Let me bring up my notes on the little video here. The Loch Gorm. The Kilchoman Loch Gorm Islay single malt Scotch whiskey. It's aged in ex-Oloroso sherry cask. It's non-chill filtered, has natural color. It's bottled at 46% alcohol by volume, and sells for anywhere between $110 and $120. So this is a little bit more expensive than the others. I'm going to start doing this, start paying attention, particularly if it seems real tight. It may be you might be able to prevent breaking a cork if the cork is dry if you do this. Now, I've heard people talk about going around and just doing this with all their bottles. And I've seen Andrew over at Scotch for Dummies do that. He does this a lot more. In fact, he was over here a few weeks ago visiting California. He came over here, and before we had some drams, real nice whiskeys, and he did that. It may be doing that prevents breakage, because you get a load in there, and if now it's been lubed a little bit to open it up. My only concern is cork contact with a high ABV whiskey or spirit period could also contribute to the deterioration of the cork, and consequently, you're going to cork your whiskey. I don't know. I mean, you have to do an experiment. Does giving a wee tip help prevent cork breakage? And does doing this with your whiskeys increase the possibility of deteriorating the cork because of the alcohol? I don't know. I have to Google that to find out. But either way, it's probably a gamble. I can tell you right now, I started to try to open the cork. Pull the cork. And I could tell there was a little resistance, a little friction. And that was what said to my mind, hey, Erik, give it a bonk, bonk, loosen it, give it a little moisture in there before you pull it. And I definitely tell it helped. It helped lube. I know, sounds gross talking whiskey about lube. Help lube the cork to get the cork out of there. Oh, yeah. Now, this one, the sherry cask is making its presence known. It's darker. It's richer. And darker as a pigment. It sounds strange to be talking about darker of a whiskey, but those things that we associate with, like dark chocolate. So whereas this is more like a chocolate covered raisin, this is dark chocolate, heavier dark chocolate, baker's chocolate. There's more spice. What kind of spices? Not pepper, not cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. The smoke, even the smoke character has changed. These first two, particularly the Machir Bay, was more ashy. The Kilchoman 100% Islay was more campfire. This one is more, wow, it's more barbecue. And a lot of times sherry will do that. A sherry cask will do that. What sherry, because you might get a little sulfur notes from sherry, from the sherry cask, but combined with the peat smoke, it becomes a little bit more barbecue and gets a little bit more savory rather than just sweet. By the way, in terms of sweetness, all these, I would say, are moderately sweet. They're not super sweet, but they're also not bone dry. They're moderately sweet. Well, let me I'll take that back. The Machir Bay has a more intense powdered sugar, saccharine sweetness to it. It is sweeter, at least comes across as sweeter than these other whiskeys. This one's darker. There's even maybe just a whiff of nuttiness. So I'm like a chocolate bar with nuts in it. I was just thinking about, usually a lot of Islay whiskeys, you'll get a saltiness. I'm not, man, this is the Machir Bay. Man, it's so clear, the ashiness on it. So, but I'm not getting any saltiness on this. Whereas I do on Kalila, I will on Bowmore, I do on Lefroy and Lagavulin, but more on Ardbeg. And I'm not in this. Now, the funny thing is, as you saw in the video, in the history video, Kilchoman is the only distillery that isn't on a shoreline. I never ever put these two things together regarding Kilchoman, that it doesn't have the saltiness that the other ones do. Now, some casks from Islay distilleries spend a lot of their aging on the mainland before they go in the bottle, particularly Kalila. But I still get a saltiness on them. I'm not really getting a salty on this one. Let me show you. Yeah, it's something that people do, but then don't talk about. I'm really, really, really hoping that this might make a difference. I turn it into a habit. It might be willing, get 2 bottles from Bruichladdich, same bottles, open up at the same time, and over a 5-10 year period, continue to compare the two and see if one of them ends up breaking and the other one doesn't because you are wetting the cork. So dark chocolate, raisins, black fruit notes, blackberries, heavy dark peat, and smoke, richness, barbecue. Just a teensy, this much nuttiness, just a little bit. So it starts to become much more of a dark chocolate. Man, I'm tired, man. I need to take a nap and I need to eat dinner. Chocolate bar on the palate. There's so much more going on there. It has more layers. It has more depth of flavor. This was distilled in 2010, bottled in 2016. Same age as these other whiskeys, 6 years. And yet it seems potentially older because of the richness of the casks that they're using and that sherry cask. It does a really good job of hiding the age. So I've had these bottles for a while. It's probably since I probably bought these all within 2018. And obviously from the notes, this is also the most expensive. But it's got a lot more going on there as well. I did a video and I did a re-review of this, and I said that this is the best of Kilchoman in terms of from the core range. In terms of from the core range, and I'm gonna stand by that. I respect philosophically in terms of production methods and all that, the whiskey geekiness of the 100% Islay. But if someone was just going to pour me a whiskey and sit down and drink it, I'm going to go for the Loch Gorm. The Loch Gorm. Really, really, really like this whiskey. Now, these are all the core range. I think it's a businesses in San Francisco. It's called Impex, Impex, independent bottler. They're sort of like an independent bottler, and yet it has the official labeling on it. So it's a label. It's bottled for Impex. This is an 11-year-old. I have a 10-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. The casking is the same. Non-chill folded, natural color. This is bourbon cask bottled at 56.4% ABV, so a little more higher ABV. This one is bottle number 302. Wait. Sorry. Print is small. So if you're having difficulty reading something, you can get okay. Cask number 302 from 2007. The date it was filled in September 19th. Okay. So this is cask number 302 from the year 2007. 2007. The cask was filled in September 19th, 2007, and then bottled on January 3rd, 2019. So it's an 11-year-old bottled at 56.4% alcohol by volume. If you don't have a magnifying glass, I just use the camera function on the smartphone and then zoom in so you can read stuff. So if you're looking for something from Kilchoman, but you want something a little bit different, something a little extra special, this is a bottle you can look for. I was drinking some of this earlier the week. Before I do a video or a live stream, I like to go back if I can. If I have multiple bottles from the same distillery and compare bottles from the same distillery, or I'll also similar casking and age from other distilleries. And I went back to it. I have a 10-year-old from the previous year, and this is an 11-year-old. I prefer this one. This is, really, really, really powerful stuff. If you want something that really makes Kilchoman shine, look for these type of bottles. Look, I'll put it up here. Look for the Impex bottling. If you want to know where you can get them, there is a shop where I used to live in Roseville, California. Bourbon, wine, and spirits. Bourbon, wine, and spirits in Roseville, California. I believe now they sell online. The owner is named Eli. Eli, if you haven't been watching this, Eli doesn't know I'm doing this. I used to go by the shop probably once or twice a week just to say hi. And there's another gentleman, former Marine, Semper Fi, George, who works there as well. So you happen to be in the Sacramento area, check out Bourbon, Wine, and Spirits, or check out their website, and you can order online as well. If you happen to be dropping by, tell them you heard about the store from Erik Wait. Check them out. But I know Eli, excuse me, just burping. Eli has these special bottlings. He's got a lot of special bottlings there from various distilleries. So if you're looking for them, check that out. Now, I'm sure other places have them as well, but check out Bourbon, Wine, and Spirits. What did I give in terms of score? I think high 80s, probably 89, probably 89. It's just a really, really, really nice whiskey. All righty. So we've been at this for now an hour and 22 minutes. I am feeling very comfortable. This has been a really, really fun, great experience. Another part of education and understanding the character of a distillery. Just like getting to know a person, hanging out with a person, having dinner, I don't know, go play around a golf, go bowling, whatever. And spending time with a person, you get to know what that person's personality is like, what their character is like. Listening to a lot of albums from a particular band, over the years, you get to understand what they're like as a band, their sound, their style, and with a single distillery going through a number of their whiskeys, whether you're visiting the distillery and tasting them, or able to do something like this, or you're at a tasting event, maybe even with a whiskey rep, it's a great experience because you're doing comparative tasting. And you're going to see there's certain common traits in between all these, which I would say the common trait and character between all these whiskeys is a certain clarity and pristineness in the character of the spirit, in the mouthfeel, in the viscosity and overall mouthfeel of these whiskeys. But the peak character changes a little bit when you go from the Machir Bay all up there. The Machir Bay is more ashy, and when you get up here to the Sanaig and Kilchoman, it's more chocolatey. It's more chocolatey, and it's probably got a little bit more age on it as well. That's really helping out with that. Alrighty, if anyone watching this on a replay has any comments, if you have any questions, leave them down below. If you're watching this and you haven't already, give it a thumbs up. And if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. So this next week, I will be delving into Jura. I have 3 bottles from Jura. I've already tasted them all. I'm not sure if I'm going to review them all over the next couple of weeks or if I'll just do one and then move on. After Jura, I'll be doing Highland Park. I'm becoming much more of a fan of Highland Park. And then we'll get into Springbank. And that'll wrap up this current series. Going into 2023, a lot of these distilleries that I've covered in this series, I will be covering again. But in these videos, I've been focusing on the history in the whiskey. We will be focusing more on the distinctiveness of the production of these distilleries as we go into 2023. So basically, do they have a dunnage warehouse? What is the shape of the stills? How many stills? What's the production level? Do they use shell and tube? Do they use a worm tub? Do they use a clear wort? So on and so forth. So we'll cover these again, but we'll focus more on production and understanding production and versus the history of these distilleries. All righty. So, hey, if you're an American, and you're going to be celebrating Thanksgiving this week, we have a lot to be thankful for. I'm thankful for Providence. I'm thankful for, the United States isn't perfect, but I'm thankful for everything that we have here, the freedoms that we still have here in this country. I'm thankful for those who came before us, who laid the groundwork so that we can live the way in which we do. And so I'll be spending Thanksgiving Day. My parents are gone. My oldest brother's gone. Aunts, uncles, grandparents are all gone. But I'll be spending Thanksgiving Day with some cousins and some of my brothers and their cousins' kids and all that. So I'm looking forward to that. Be drinking some wine. So I will see you next week after Thanksgiving Day. But during the week, I should be doing a video on Jura and be looking at the history of Jura. But otherwise, if you're not an American, or you just don't celebrate Thanksgiving, Canada celebrated like a month ago. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And until next time, Slàinte mhath.